So on the show today, Hameed Ali, so also known as A.H. Almaas, the author of many, many books on presence and spirituality and a whole bunch of topics. Someone that's really respected and liked by many people I respect and like. So I've just been immersing myself in his work, but I know a huge amount about it. I've been on a rapid learning curve, and I like what I've heard so far about the Ridwan school and the diamond approach. Hameed, welcome.
Good to be here
So
again in this conference. Yes.
how did you get interested in your work? I'd love to hear a little bit about your life, because I've listened to a few interviews and I still don't know much about you as a person. So I'd love to hear a little bit about sort of how this became interesting to you.
Well, I started as a scientist. I was studying physics and math and getting my PhD in physics when I felt that what I was looking for wasn't going to be there. Because I started from a teenager, wanted to know what is the truth of reality. And I thought science was a good way to go to find the truth. It's the most objective thing there is around the world. But then I was pretty good at it and I studied it. And then I found out it was a feeling that's not exactly what I'm looking for. Especially seeing the people there and knowing them there. It was a very mental thing. And I realized what I wanted is a more fundamental truth. So I left and I went into psychology. I got a PhD in psychology. And I got involved in many of the growth movement at that time, like SLN style growth movement. And I did many of that. And then I joined spiritual groups and, attended some teaching, various teachers at that time. I had Tibetan Lama, studied with a Tibetan Lama. I studied with a Hindu, tantric teacher. Gurdjieffian kind of teachers and different kinds. But I was interested in that, and that was my interest. I realized that's my interest. I wanted to go there. I wanted to find. It felt like that's the direction for the truth I was looking for.
And this was in the United States, right? I mean, as I understand
That's
it,
only United States.
Kuwait.
Yes, I came to United States at 18 to go to college. I was born and raised in Kuwait, and I got a scholarship to come here and study physics, basically. I went to University of California in Berkeley to study physics, and I'm still in Berkeley. Stuck in a really long time. I came here in 1964, right in the middle of the, free speech movement and hippie movement and the whole thing. I came into quite a culture.
How was that? Like 1964, you've grown up in Kuwait, and all of a sudden you're in like Haight Ashbury, Summer of Love type situation. That was
yeah. It wasn't like that, smoking pot and going to the concert and stuff like that, between physics and math classes.
a culture shock, I imagine, as well.
Actually, it was fun.
Okay.
It was the culture shock for me wasn't that. Was going to a straightforward school when I was in the East Coast. I first went to the East Coast and went to the prep school.
Okay.
For me, that was the culture shock. You have to go to church. You have to go Sunday. You have to go to the football game. That for me, that was more of a culture shock. Berkeley was sort of freedom.
Okay.
you could do whatever you want. You can, and you can hang out with different kind of peoples and all that. So I enjoyed it actually. I became part of that actually, and that's part of what sort of I think affected my direction. And Berkeley, because it was such in the center of these things, many of the teachers were very involved with that kind of thing. They were involved in inner search. And so some of the teachers affected me that way because I was studying things like Zen Buddhism and Martin Buber and all of that in my classes.
And what do your family think of this? I mean, are you from a Muslim background, and then
Yeah, I grew up with a Muslim background. Well, my family, they wanted me to finish physics and come back. Fact that, and they wanted me just get a job. They didn't care what I was doing. But then, so when I stopped, before I finished my PhD, my father was very disappointed. I thought, oh, it's not going to happen and all of that. And so basically, I told him, well, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm fine. So I went to psychology and then did various other things. And I continued having a scholarship for a while. But then it shifted and I started working. I was working in a more psychological way and I learned body work, like Reichen therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing Reichen therapy for a while. And then at some point, while I was involved with different groups, spiritual teachers, all of that, but I wasn't connected to just one teacher. I wasn't like that. Although I was finding them, and actually I was looking for something that would be my thing. But it turned out what my thing came from within. I began having experiences and illuminations that were not connected to anything I was studying. And I learned about spirit as presence from direct experience, my own experience, you see, which then unfolded and developed and transformed my consciousness and my way of life. And at some point, I realized what was happening. So it was like a stream of experiences of awakenings. People have like an awakening and they go teach. For me, I didn't have just an awakening. I had one awakening after another, and expanding and reverberating. And after a while, I saw there is a whole body of knowledge, a whole teaching. And I realized that's not just for me. I was just a vehicle being sort of used to bring about a teaching, which I now call the Diamond Approach.
Okay, and you mentioned this word presence. I've heard you, I was listening to some interviews you did with Tammy Simon talking about this. Where do we start with presence? What is it?
Presence is a word that's becoming common now. I was probably one of the first people to put the word presence out in my first book, Essence, which came out in the 80s. Not many people, I don't remember people using the word presence it wasn't common in the literature. So I put it out there. And then it took on because other teaching were starting to use the word presence, like Dzogchen, like the Dzogchen used the word presence. And for me, people don't know what really, when they hear presence, they don't know. They think present means presence of mind, or you're more attentive. You're more, you're more aware of what's happening. For me, presence, it means all of these things, but all of these things are the effect of presence, not presence. Presence is the spiritual nature itself manifesting in the consciousness as a palpable, almost inner substance, almost a substance of light, substance of luminosity appearing in the consciousness and filling the whole body in the whole field of consciousness and feeling that is I, that is what I am. And the sense of presence, people talk about I am. So the am is more important than I. It's the sense of pure being, pure existence, and recognizing it, then it is just the fact. It's the ontological dimension of myself, of reality. So presence is being. When I say my presence, I mean my being. And my being is recognizing my existence in a more fundamental sense as pure existing. People No, they exist, but it is sort of they feel their body, their emotion, they say they exist. They don't feel existence itself.
So is it a feeling? It's a state? I'm not understanding.
It is a state of consciousness. It
A
is a
state
state
of
of
consciousness.
it is a state of consciousness, but it is the very nature of consciousness itself. It's a state of consciousness. When consciousness is present, it's a state of consciousness, but here you are experiencing the consciousness itself, not what consciousness functioning, being conscious of something. No, the presence of consciousness. So I feel I am consciousness. And the consciousness is a palpable presence, is like a mass of light, condensed light.
And how do you know if you're in this state or not? What would be the litmus test here?
When you're in it, you know it. When you're not in it, you don't know it. It is its own knowing. The presence has its own knowing of itself. It's not my mind that knows it. The presence says, I am here and I know myself as presence. See, so that's something many people, of course, don't understand. It's not normal experience, ordinary experience. Ordinary experience is that you know something. There's you knowing something. And presence, when I experience presence, is more like the presence and the knowing of presence are the same thing. The knowing of the presence and the existence of presence are the same thing. So I am being is its own knowing. So there's certainty in it. And I mean, there's no other way to say it.
Okay, well, I feel confused. I don't think I understand it at all, if I'm honest. I mean, I'm attempting.
Many people be confused because most people don't understand that what they call presence is the effect of presence, not the real presence. The real presence is what makes us be able to be attentive and aware and our mind present, because that's the effect of something that of its nature is the here and now. So for me, the here and now is not this moment and this place. The here and now is the presence itself. So it feels like here-ness and feels like now-ness.
And what's the relationship with the body to presence?
The body is the presence first appears in the body. The presence feels like it's something that fills the body. And by feeling the body, there is a sense of embodiment. Embodiment takes another level. Embodiment means not just I'm feeling my body, but that my body is full of me, full of my spiritual nature. So my spiritual nature is embodied, is filling and coming through the body.
So rather than just being aware of the body, like a kind of body scanning, there's a sense that this is who I am, or how should I understand that?
Yeah, that is who I am. But it's not the body that's who I am. The body seemed to be the outer vehicle for the presence to emerge. So it's like when you feel yourself, there's a sense of a field of subjectivity within you, right? There's sensation, feeling, a whole atmosphere, thoughts. But throughout the whole, if you are aware of your body, if your body is activated and sensitive, not some people, their body is dead, numb, and stuff like that. They don't feel of their body. But if you feel your body and it's really free and the energy flowing, the inner subjectivity, what is it? Most people don't know what that is. They think it's just their brain being aware of himself. But if you really feel it and sense it, you realize it is an inner atmosphere of subjectivity, an inner atmosphere of knowingness, inner atmosphere of sensitivity. And if we delve into that deeper, we recognize it is pure consciousness, that our body is full of consciousness. And it's the body full of, it is what is conscious of the feeling, the thoughts, and the sensation, all are appearing within the consciousness that I am. And then when I recognize this is consciousness filling me, then the next step, I recognize this consciousness has its own presence. That consciousness, its nature is that it is here. So it is the beingness of this consciousness that is presence. But you're always consciousness. You're conscious, but you're not only conscious, you are consciousness in the body. Animating the body, sensitizing the body, making the body be alive. The aliveness of the body comes from the consciousness. Thus, when people die, they say they leave the body. What leaves the body? It's consciousness.
Okay. And you talked about sort of going deeper into things, and I've heard this inquiry method is quite central to your school. This is pretty interesting to me, this idea that you inquire into something. That's not so common amongst sort of meditative traditions, so I'm curious about that.
No, it's not common. There are things sort of similar like it, like Ramana Maharshi, they call it inquiry, self-inquiry. Who am I? Right? You probably heard of that. That's one kind of inquiry. There's the Platonic inquiry, Socratic inquiry. You've heard of that. Socrates saying, what is courage, for instance, for students? And he goes about it from a perspective. He's not going to answer them. He wants them to find out by experiencing courage. So it is similar to that, except it is the inquiry I have is not just in the self, not into a particular thing, but into our ordinary experience, whatever we happen to be experiencing at the moment. Because our ordinary experience is nothing but the outer form of the depth that we are, the outer form of all of our being, all of our consciousness. So by inquiring into it, it begins to sort of thin out and open up and reveal deeper dimension of itself. And those deeper dimensions become the consciousness and the experience of presence.
Does it take long? I mean, I'm curious to try it if this is something you'd be willing to do. I don't know if that's appropriate.
It's a skill. It's a skill you develop. It's a practice, like any practice, any spiritual practice, like meditation. It takes time to learn meditation. You don't. Inquiry is the same thing, but it is simpler in some sense because basically you feel yourself in the present moment, like whatever you're experiencing right now, and you don't assume you completely know what it means because you don't. You only feel some part of it, aware of some part. You feel it, and you aware of it as much as possible, and you could see how body sensitivity is important because a lot of what's happening is in the body, at least initially. That's how we experience it happening in the body. So the body needs to be sensitive and open. So that's what we feel like our sadness, our pain, our joy, our anger, our frustration or conflict, whatever it is we're feeling, we don't reject it, we don't judge it, we don't try to change it, we inquire in it because we're interested in grokking it, finding out what is it? What's it telling me? What's it about? Where is it coming from? How come I'm feeling this way? How come I'm thinking that way? And so there's a lot of questioning and curiosity about my ongoing condition. And if I continue with this questioning instead of just believing I already know what it is, I feel, well, I'm sad. Okay, I'm sad. I know what I am. It's not true. Like I feel I'm sad. And I say, well, I'm sad because, my friend didn't call me today. Supposed to call, didn't call me. That is true. That's part of the beginning of the truth. But why is it when your friend doesn't call you, you feel sad? If you inquire into that, you realize that connected with previous experiences of feeling sort of forgotten, and then you feel sad. All the way to your childhood, your parent, your mother forgot you, and you feel abandoned and feeling sad. And the sadness becomes deep sadness then, changes in its depth. And if you inquire, well, how about if my mother forgot me and I felt alone and sad? Why? And then you realize because mother represents something that I need, which is a kind of love. That I'm feeling sad because I'm missing that kind of love. The moment I recognize I'm missing that kind of love, I begin to feel there's some love missing here, some kind of sweetness, some kind of care missing here. That is acknowledgement of the fact that I want something and I don't have it now. That can open up the consciousness for this love to emerge, because the love is part of our heart. And then can emerge the sweet nectar. That's how I experienced it. Experiencing it right now, the sweet golden nectar that fills the heart, that makes me feel happy and contented. And then no sadness.
There's something I love.
Start with just a little sadness.
Yeah.
On a little thing, and ends up to something profound and spiritual.
I've seen a couple of examples of friends of mine here in the Ridran school, and they start off with something like, "Hey, my husband's annoying me with some small thing he does in the kitchen or something." Or I've just got this like heaviness today. Like maybe they start somatically rather than. And then it just rapidly goes into just huge depth and opens up into some really. There's something I love about that it just asking these questions. Is it? I don't know if you ask just why, or you just keep asking what is that? Is there a particular question you ask? But there's something I love about that depth just opening up from something that could seem quite ordinary.
Yeah, well, of course, and I like it too. But that tells us something, that the surface is connected to the depth. People think it's all the surface. There's nothing more. But the surface is just the outer layer of many layers, and the depth is right there. If we really just inquire, question it, and investigate it, that we get into the depth, and the depth is our presence, our beingness.
And you do that in pairs or in groups? Like, what's the method there exactly?
You could do it by yourself, like I did by myself for a long time. You could do it, we do it in the groups, in pairs, sometimes in groups of 3, where one person is sort of inquiring, the other 2 people listening and witnessing, and then they have after the person does the inquiry, like for 15 minutes, then the 3 of them discuss it, what happened, to help the person even understand further what happened. Whether they ask, why did you ask that question? How come you didn't ask yourself this question? So that continues the inquiry and help the person. We call that a triad, but we could also do it in dyads. We have different forms that we could do the inquiry. There's several of them.
So is that one of the main practices? Like if someone went to a Ridwan school retreat, they'd be doing that, maybe meditation as well. Like give me some idea of what are the range of practices.
Usually what we do in a meeting, like in a retreat, we start with a meditation. We teach a meditation. We start meditation like 20 or 30 minute meditation at the beginning. And then after that, there is a presentation of a teaching, a talk, presenting a particular topic like love or compassion or intelligence or something about how to deal with the uncertainty of the world these days, right? So the teacher gives a talk for 30 minutes or so, and then present an exercise for the group to do. They pair up or get in group 3, they do exercises, and on that way they get their own experience of the topic. So the teacher basically, by giving a talk, that is pointing to a particular area of experience, particular area or particular something that might be useful. And the student then, by doing their own inquiry, they get into it personally in their own experience. They're not just taking what the teacher says, but they're sort of inquiring into them, finding out for themselves. You see, and then we come, like everybody come back together. Everybody have things to share or ask me question, and when they do that, I don't just answer them with words. I work with them a little bit, further inquiry to get them deeper into their experience. And that's how a meeting usually happens, about 3 hours meeting.
Oh, wow. Okay. So takes a while. And
Yeah.
some people have described your work to me as sort of a mix of spiritual and therapeutic. Is that fair, or is there a better way of saying it?
It's a mixture of spiritual and psychological, not therapeutic. I mean, all spirituality has a therapeutic effect. You know, if you really are centered, you know who you are, that helps you with, you know, all kinds of ways. But the orientation is not toward therapy. The orientation is about illumination, enlightenment.
How would you describe the different aim of the two? Is it that therapy is just about being happier, and you know, what would you say is the different goal of the two
Well,
activities?
I mean, I started as a Reichen therapist. Many of my friends, I studied many kind of therapies and psychology. So therapy is basically helping a person deal with difficulties they have in their life, practical things like in marriage and work, their self-esteem, depression, to help them with that so they manage it well. And basically, therapy, the aim of it is that the person is able to have a relatively good relationship and be able to work and support themselves and as much of a harmony as possible. That's what therapy is. But therapy is not oriented about finding out what is your spiritual nature.
So what you say, that is the goal of spiritual work to you, is finding out your spiritual nature
and to become it and live it. Well, yeah, of course, all spiritual teachings are about that.
And I've also heard you talk about the sort of centrality of truth in the spiritual quest, which may or may not make you happy.
Yeah, because the truth, you see, many spiritual teaching, when they say truth, they mean the spiritual nature. When I use the word truth, I mean it on any level. When we talked about being sad, I'm sad because my friend didn't call me. That is true. That is the truth. Then realizing that that sad is related to my early relation with my mother, that is a deeper part of that truth. Until I get to the feeling of experiencing this golden love, that is the truth. And until I recognize that the golden nectar is a kind of it's not just an emotion, it is an isness. It is the presence of spirit and as love, that we are arriving at spiritual truth. And that could go deeper. Where does that spiritual love come from? Until you find yourself, I am the fundamental consciousness. That is the nature of everything, not just me. It's the luminosity and awareness and transparency that is the ground that can manifest itself as love, can manifest itself as compassion, can manifest itself as strength, clarity, or all of these things. But the ground is what people call the non-dual ground of spirit. So a spirit has many forms and many dimensions to it. So the truth of the spirit goes deeper and deeper and deeper.
Earlier, you talked about kind of uncertainty in the world today, and I noticed something when you said that. So I want to come back to that. It felt alive to me. So how can this help with the uncertainty people face? Like, I've got friends saying, how do I plan my business next year? You know, I'm trying to travel next week, and my assistant's saying, well, maybe you won't be able to get back home, you know, and then that's not, a huge worry to me, but there's people with real concerns about their businesses and their lives, and just the not knowing that is, I guess, always part of life, but it seems to be particularly prevalent in the sort of current
These days, it's more intense, it's more prevalent. You're right. I mean, life is uncertain in general, and spiritual teach from that perspective. We're never certain. We never know what's going to happen the next moment, right? You can't just take things for granted. That's basic spiritual teaching, and part of it is that you never know when you're going to die. For instance, that's the uncertainty. But these days, life is uncertain because of the specific things that are going on: a pandemic, you know, political turmoil, racial problem, all kinds of stuff that are happening, these days, which make things uncertain. You don't know whether you could travel, you can visit people, all of that. It's uncertainty, and it's disturbance too. The world is disturbed. So, of course, there are many ways to deal with it. First of all, spiritual teaching comes in very handy, because if you are familiar with your own spiritual nature, if you know what presence is, the presence is something that is in some sense out of this world, is not affected by what happens in this world. It is not destroyed, it's not diminished. It is what it is, you see. So the presence, if I am the presence, I'm a staple. It gives me a sense of stability in the midst of all that uncertainty.
Rather than my job, or I've got this much money, or whatever.
Yeah, so all of that can be happening, but if I am centered in my pure presence, I know what I am. That is the most fundamental thing, you see, that I am. And whatever happens, even if I die, I am this pure consciousness that aware of itself. But that is a fundamental thing about how all spirituality can be helpful in this situation. It gives you an inner refuge, you could say, a place of peace, a place of comfort, a place of where everything that's happening outside is outside, while inside you are settled. But also spirituality gives you a sense of confidence, a sense of grounding and support, and a sense of capacity. There is true courage, there's a true intelligence, there's true clarity that help us navigate all these things. So I don't think, just feeling peaceful inside is enough to deal with uncertainty. It helps. It is a central thing. But the uncertainty requires us to feel like I am comfortable with not knowing what's going to happen.
I've definitely.
So I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable with my not knowing, because I know myself. That's the most important thing. You see,
there's an anchor in that, isn't there? And there has been this year, people who have really suffered are the ones who have suffered most, are the ones who are not comfortable with the uncertainty and the not knowing. Whereas those who've had a spiritual practice which brings them into contact with the fact and some peace with that there's always change and you could die at any moment. And there seems to be a sort of better coping, if nothing else, with the chaos.
Yeah, so it is just it's the usual spiritual realization. People want it because they want to be free from the impact of all the changes, including the changes of life and death, ultimately. But life is always changing, always uncertain. And as you know, if somebody who is really deeply spiritual, it doesn't matter if they're rich or poor, or they're from a certain class or another. All these things don't matter, because spirit is beyond all of these things.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think is the future of spirituality? I mean, you've been right at the heart of it. Physics, the whole hippie scene. You've been a big part of the modern spiritual scene for a long time. And now we're having all this turmoil. My guess is like the economy and ethnic relations and everything else, it will be reset. what do you think that reset might be?
Well, I mean, that's like predicting the future, as you know, it's uncertain. Uncertain, part of the uncertainty is we don't know what's going to be the new normal, right? We don't know it. And I see there are possibilities, spectrum of possibilities. And one end of it is that people will wake up more, recognize the harm that happens from division, from racial and economic disparity, and all of that, and the climate problem, and dealing with the pandemic intelligently, and all of that. People might wake up and realize, well, it's better for us to go about it in an intelligent way, in a way that really respect all human beings, because spirituality from inside is that we all one. We're unified in our spiritual nature. We all have the same spiritual nature. There is nobody who's up more or less. It is all the same thing. If we feel it, that makes us. So it's possible that human being will, because of the situation, the pressure of the situation, might make people a little more open, turning more inward to inner resources that might bring up some kind of a revival or some kind of improvement in the human condition. That's one possibility. The other possibility, the other side, is that things might get worse. That the strife has its momentum. That the disturbance and the division, the political and the racial and the economic, has its big momentum, and maybe we haven't reached the worst of it.
Yeah, spirituality and polarization often do seem like oil and water, in that there's fundamental spiritual truth is we're all one, then it's very difficult to polarize, but equally polarization doesn't seem to create a climate conducive to spirituality developing.
It isn't, no. I think a spiritual person cannot be polarized. I mean, I can't imagine myself hating somebody else because they are of a different political persuasion. Doesn't make sense. The most I can think of them is that they're ignorant.
I mean, is there a case to say the sort of the spiritual movement of the West Coast has really failed in a way, in that it was the sort of the new religion of America, the spirituality of the Western world, and so many great schools and great teachers that I respect and I've listened to, and yet we find ourselves in this situation where, for example, Berkeley, where you are, massive polarization, hatred for anyone that has conservative views. I mean, really vehemently, venomously, poisonously polarized at times. And like Berkeley's like the epicenter of that.
Yeah, so, because Berkeley was one end of a spectrum, the way it was, the way it still is. Well, because you have to remember, I mean, you say the spiritual movement in the Western coast. The spiritual movement is actually throughout in many parts of the United States and in the Western world. There has been some kind of a secular spirituality, you could call it. It's not religious, but more movement inward, movement to illumination or awakening. And you say it's failed. Well, if you're thinking of it changing the world or moving society, yes, it failed. But I never thought it was going to do that. Spiritual movement all throughout history, they are only affect a few people and locally, because most people are not ready for that spirituality. They might be politically liberal or conservative or whatever, but that doesn't mean they're open to the spiritual nature. And also, many people who engage in spirituality are not successful in accessing the spiritual nature. It's not easy. See, many, I mean, you can have like 100 people and then following a teacher, maybe 2 or 3 of them will learn. But there were like spiritual teachers like Krishnamurti. I don't know if you remember Krishnamurti.
Yeah.
He taught for decades.
Yeah.
None of his students got illuminated. You see, although he had tens of thousands, 100,000 people following.
Why does
People
it have
liked
such
their name, few things, but none of them got enlightened.
why
None
does
of them
it have
became
such
like
a
him.
bad hit rate? Like, if spiritual practice was a drug, it wouldn't be allowed by, what do you have, the FDA in America? It wouldn't be allowed because it would be the percentage improvement would be too low. Like, and we all know people who do lots of spiritual work and are just dickheads, for want of a better word. Like, why is it such a low hit rate? Is it just always been that way since the Sufi times or whatever?
Yes, always been that way. Always been few people interested, first of all, and requires a great deal of focus and making it priority number ones in life. Not easy for most people to do that.
And even then, a degree of randomness, it looks like, as well, right? Like, there are people who have realizations just fairly randomly, and other people who work their whole life sincerely, meditating 5
I mean, it does happen randomly, but that's the rare thing. Most people who become illuminated or have fulfillment in their life are following a particular path, a particular teaching. And all teaching have people in it, like, if you look at Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, many of the lamas are highly developed. You see. But not all of them, it's not the majority. Most lamas, just lamas. But a few of the Rinpoches are highly developed. That's how it goes in spirituality. So that's why I don't think if spiritual realization going to change the world in a big way. You see, the events of the world are powerful, like the racial thing or wars or nationalism, for instance. These are huge movements that affect masses, and people rather die for their country, but then won't die for their spirit, you see.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a bleak picture in a way that we've got this kind of very low.
That's what Gurdjieff, you've heard of Gurdjieff.
Yes.
He said, man is asleep. You see. And that's what the Sufi says. Humanity is asleep and few can wake up. It is possible to wake up, but the majority, maybe there'll come a time where a big portion of humanity will be awake. We're not there yet. Mm-hmm. Humanity has not progressed spiritually that much as a whole race. From 1,000 years till now, you can't say that humanity has progressed much in terms of how many people and how much depth and how much spiritual values pervade the culture. Yeah, people are still cruel and capable of being cruel and selfish and self-seeking. Most people are. Most people are afraid. They want just to survive.
Right, yeah, thinking about it.
Which is important. People need to survive. That's natural. But people are willing to do all kind of strange things to survive.
I mean, that's
and selfishness and wanting to accumulate money and possession, regardless of other people's suffering. That's very common in the world. It's nothing new, but still happening.
Do you think if conditions get more comfortable and stable, that's better because more people have the space to not be in that survival mode? It's hard to think about spirituality when you're hungry, when you're just trying to put food on the table for your family. Or do you think people get sort of too comfortable, which is another experience I've had in Northern California, is sort of people get to a place where like life's almost too comfortable and then there isn't that kind of drive? Like, is there an optimal, like right now things are so chaotic, it seems like it's gone to become very difficult to be thinking about spirituality?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. You look at the rich people, the millionaires and billionaires of the world. Are they spiritual? Are more of them spiritual? Are more of them seek their inner realization? In our school, which is 5,000 people, we have few individuals who are millionaires or billionaires, you see, who are interested in their finding what is the truth of who and what they are, what is life about. There's very few. Most billionaires and millionaires in the world are trying to make more millions.
Right, they're still caught in that game.
It is called that.
Oh.
So being rich, being comfortable is not sufficient. You need to have a confluence of circumstances. First, you do need to have some leisure time that helps, right? But you also need to have some inner challenges that can make you feel that what I'm getting from outside isn't doing it.
Yeah, for me, there's been, if I think in my own life, there's been times when there's a sweet spot where I can have enough resources to be able to have time and money for retreats or, mental space for that. But kind of when things were sort of very comfortable and easy, I didn't really have a motivation, like in sort of Buddhist model, that human realm is the kind of sweet spot maybe for it.
Yeah, it is. But remember, one thing we have to see is that spirituality is a certain stage of development for the human, a particular human being. Human being develop from different stage to another. They go all the way from the pure animal level, which is wanting to just survive at any cost, to being a little more heartful, more caring, right? And valuing relationship, and to the way of being more rational and seeing that equality really works better and things like that. That's a development. But spiritual development is another stage beyond all of those. So humanity is sort of been developing, but in a slow way. And it is developing in some way. There is, in some sense, in the whole world, there is more civilization, more knowledge, and more awareness, and more medical science, and all that improved our condition. So we do have more time and health and energy to engage the spiritual path. But that's by itself still not enough, although we have more opportunity. So I think of it as like it will happen more if we get into like something like in the world of Star Trek.
What do you mean?
Well,
Yeah, I love Star Trek. I love Star Trek.
Like, remember the vision of Star Trek, 23rd century, where society, nobody has to work.
Right. So,
But you could work if you want to,
yeah,
right? And nobody has to make it. So, and everybody is just doing what they want to do,
right.
because they want to be creative.
Right. It's post.
They want to find something meaningful in their life. That world will then really become a good place for spirituality to flower.
Yeah, it's a nice vision of people pursuing their sort of life purpose.
Well, I'm hoping by the 23rd century it would be something like we'll have that kind of society.
We'll have artificial intelligence. I love that you dropped these scientific metaphors in it. I did actually, before I knew you had a science background, I kept hearing you'd say, "Oh, this is a quantum warp or a time warp," but you give a few science fiction type metaphors, which I really enjoy. Which that makes sense to me. Okay, one maybe last question here then. So we've got a little bit of time. So with Daniela on the Embodiment Conference, you were doing a meditation where you were bringing the awareness to the arms and legs specifically rather than the body. I've never come across that before. Why the arms and legs rather than the whole body?
Well, first of all, it's an ancient method. And so nobody really knows why they did it that way. Right? Because it came like from 4,000 or 5,000 years old as how to do it. And I know the benefits of it. I see it by doing it. Why they did it that way, Because there are other spiritual methods that use what they call body sweeping, like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Buddhists do from above to below. They do the whole body. This is different, and this one has to do more with grounding. So the feet are very important. Feeling your feet on the ground, feeling your legs full of sensation of aliveness is very important. So the idea is the arms and legs are the part that engage the world, engage in activity. And if you do it the way this meditation goes, going from the right to the left, what happens is that there is a balancing of the right and left hemisphere of the brain. That seems partly what happened. So the mode of awareness, the way of thinking has a different kind of balance. And it's a good way to start the day doing it, because you're aware of your inside, but you're also add to it what's called sensing, looking, and listening. So that you're also aware of your outside. You're looking and listening, and it's like mindfulness. You're attentive of your situation. I use it as a practice for presence. And if you do it long enough, after a while, the arms and leg are full of presence, are full of consciousness that is aware of itself as its own presence. And then it naturally moves, fills the body. So the alignment in the arm and the legs, in some sense, is sufficient to bring the rest of the body with it, bring the trunk with it.
Thank you. It was just
That's what happened. It's not like the trunk stays not involved; it becomes alive.
Yeah, often I've seen people do it the other way around, where it's paying attention to the belly or the heart rather than the limbs.
Yeah. In some sense, this perspective says you don't want to focus a lot on your heart because it can have a damaging effect.
In what way?
Well, too much focus on the heart can actually affect the organs. Yeah, that is part of the philosophy of this practice. I'm not saying it's true, but that's a part of the philosophy. It said, no, don't focus on these things, because too much focus on these things might not. So the arms and legs are safe in some sense.
Okay.
They're not the vital organs.
Yeah.
Like the heart or the brain or the stomach or the kidney or something like that. You don't want to focus on these. You want the energy to go to those places naturally without you having to focus, because attention is a powerful thing.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely see some strong impact when I focus my attention on other parts of my body. And is there anything, Hameed, that is really alive for you that I didn't ask you about today that you think, you know what, this is just sort of on the tip of my tongue and I want to say it today?
Yeah. Oh, for me?
Yeah.
Well, what thing I've been thinking about, I was thinking like, I want to do a retreat. What am I going to do it about? And I was thinking about the uncertainty we live in, how to live with uncertainty.
It might be a topic somehow. When you said it earlier, it jumped out at me a little bit, and I thought, oh, I'll come back to that.
Yeah. Because we're living in uncertainty and turmoil, and how to live in that, how to deal with that. And I will say, you need to find an inner sanctuary. You need to find a place in you that is calm, that is quiet, that is nourishing. Whichever way you can find it, whether it's exercise, whether it's sport, whether it is meditation, but you do need to find something. And also, beside that, you need to find other people who are oriented that way.
Right.
Who care about the inner sanctuary, so you can have meaningful contact in this time, because the pandemic is difficult to have contact. But in Zoom you can have that contact if you both of you care about that inner sanctuary. The two sanctuaries can talk.
That makes sense to me. I had quite a lot of criticism recently, and some days I'd get sort of caught by it and get upset by it, and other days I'd go, well, you know, who am I beyond this criticism? Who am I beyond my reputation? Like in the same way as for someone else, it'd be beyond their money or their job or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And I found that very helpful.
So it's good to have an inner sanctuary and to be place to turn to, whether we by meditation or inquiry or sport of kind, you know, or anything that we find to bring us closer to deeper to our sense of ourselves. We know that we're more in touch with ourselves as deeply as possible, because that would be really going to be needed for some time, because our world, I think, is going to stay in turmoil and search at least for some time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We don't know what the new normal is or when it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there needs to be some other anchor, because I don't think things are going to get back to normal anytime soon in a number of fronts. Okay, so to finish, where do people find you on the internet, Hameed, if they want to like learn more about the presence or the inquiry process? What's the best place to go?
Well, we have several. We have a website, which is diamondapproach.org. One word, Diamond Approach.
Okay, diamondapproach.org.
That is our main website. And we have online courses or whatever, and that is Diamond Approach Online.
Okay, and some other courses I've seen on there too. Great. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention,
please,
I am planning for this coming year 2 set of courses. One course, I'm calling it lecture series, which is I'm going to be talking and trying to give useful information, useful insight into important teachers and teachings, like Krishnamurti, you mentioned, Mr. Gadata Maharaj. Another one who's very popular, Dogen Zenji, which is one of the main Zen founders. You know, I'm going to try to bring their perspective and understanding. It's not my teaching, but I'm not going to teach their teaching. I'm going to see how their teaching is happening in the Western world, whether people really get it or they're getting partial things. Like Nisargadatta Maharaj, I think people talk about Nandu, they don't know the depth he talks about things nobody talks about. They ignore it. And I'm also going to talk about certain teaching, like Advaita Vedanta, like Dzogchen, which is how it is practiced in the West. And is that similar to the way it's originally practiced? And if not, is it going to be effective? That is one series I'm going to be teaching. The other series, we're calling it The Lightness of Being, which is introducing part of our teaching in a way that is more, we're not trying to go as deep, as complex as possible, but to open up to some access to the subtlety of our spiritual nature.
Okay. Well, Hameed, thank you for joining us today. Much appreciated.
Yeah, good talking to you.
Take care.